Rev it up and welcome to Cars Yeah, show number 2184. Be prepared to be inspired.
This is Cars Yeah, where you'll enjoy interviews with inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Mark Green is here to provide you with a fuel injection of automotive inspiration. So get in, sit down, buckle up, and get ready for a wild ride here on Cars Yeah.
Hello, inspiring automotive enthusiasts, and welcome to Cars Yeah. Today I'm actually a little south of Gig Harbor, Tigard, Oregon, which is just a little south of Portland, so maybe a 3-hour drive from where I live with a very special guest by the name of Ross Fruin. Ross, welcome to Cars Yeah. Do you have any gear, and are you ready to release the clutch?
I am. Thanks for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure.
You're welcome. We're going to have some fun. Now, this is going to be a very different show because the career you have and the industry in the automotive world you have is unlike any other guest who's been on the show. So you're kind of a first in this arena, which I think is pretty exciting. But before we get into that, would you share one little thing that maybe most people don't know about Ross Fruin?
I will. And I'm not proud to say it out loud, but I'm a Taylor Swift fan.
Well, hey, that's okay. You know what?
Great musician. I saw her live at the F1 race in 2016, and me and my buddies kind of went as a bit of a joke because we had free tickets because you were there, and I just got hooked.
Well, it's interesting when you see artists live. Sometimes they either really disappoint you or they really impress you. And way back when my daughter was in junior high, a couple of us dads drove our daughters and their friends all the way out east to a place called The Gorge, which is about a 4-hour drive. It's a long way out there. And we got to see Britney Spears. And all of us dads were kind of like, Britney Spears, this is going to be a scream fest of little girls going nuts. And I tell you, I got a lot of respect for that young woman at that point in time in her career because I couldn't believe the kind of performance she put on. Yeah. And I kind of went home going, I kind of like Britney Spears. She's very talented. It was just an incredible show. And so it changed my whole perspective on her. Now, since then, her career's had a lot of ups and downs and sideways moves.
Yeah, she had a rough one.
Yeah, tough life. But still, when you think about what she's done with her life, Taylor Swift included, and so many, talk about picking a tough career path. Holy cow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, constantly under the spotlight.
But it's a lot like F1. It's a lot like racing. It's a lot like any sport. There are very few people at the top of their game. So we're going to have a little fun talking about that. So let me give you a proper introduction. We're going to dive into a very interesting world you created for yourself. Ross Fruin is the co-founder and CEO of Grid Rival, the best motorsports app that allows fans to engage with their favorite sports in an innovative way. At GridRival, the focus on creating an authentic experience rich with real-time cash-based fantasy games, industry-leading content, and a community of like-minded race fans. Previously, Ross co-founded Search Logic, a Portland-based digital media buying firm, having held a CEO position there for 3 years, and together with a talented team, they grew it into a multi-million-dollar organization in the digital media buying space, serving a variety of leading brands. We'll be back in just a moment to learn a lot more about this and what Ross and his team is doing. But first, a word from our sponsors. So, you know what? Give them a little love. They put the fuel in the tanks here, and we'll be right back. Autumn has arrived, the weather is changing, and that means your vehicle needs extra protection against everything that Mother Nature can drop. Covercraft offers you a multitude of layers and protection for your special rides. Are you putting your summer toys, watercraft, RV, motorcycles, trailers, even your patio furniture away? Well, Covercraft has a custom fit cover just for you. Covercraft offers you 10 different car cover options. That's right, 10 for your vehicle's protection, whether you store it inside or out. All carefully crafted into the form and fit with the quality and attention to detail that's been their standard since 1965. And don't forget their custom fit seat covers, pet pads, yeah, Fido's gonna get wet and muddy, dash mats, sunscreens, and custom fit floor mats and trunk mats are available at covercraft.com. Whatever the surface you want to protect, Covercraft has a solution just for you. And if you use the code YEAH21 at covercraft.com, you'll get 10% off your Covercraft order plus free shipping. That's right, 10% off and free shipping. Simply use the code YEAH21 at checkout. Come on, Mother Nature, bring it on. Covercraft, protecting the things that move you. Fall is here, and you know what that means. Time to put a good coat of protection on your vehicle. I'm teamed up with AutoGeek, and they've been the leading source of auto detailing products, accessories, and expert knowledge for more than 20 years. What started back in 1997 as a small mail-order catalog company grew into a multi-website-based e-commerce store, and that's what they are today. With a large online presence on its own website featuring close to 100 different brands, AutoGeek has grown to be the largest car care retailer in the country. AutoGeek's wholesale program serves accounts in over 30 countries, and its retail sector ships worldwide. If you want to protect your vehicle this fall, and you should, go to autogeek.net for the best product selection on the internet today and technical support. Autogeek.net is where I go for my detailing needs. That's autogeek.net. When it was time to renew my collector car policy, my carrier raised my rates by a lot. But why? My usage was the same, my car's value was the same, and I had never made a claim. I didn't even have a ticket. The only change was their rate, and they had no reason why. What's with that? I researched my options. I spoke to others. What a difference. A live person actually answers the phone. She spent time learning about me and provided a reasonable quote. Why wait until your next premium is due? Give them a call today for your personal agreed value quote. Call 866-AC1-YEAH. That's 866-224-9324. Tell them you're a friend of mine, Mark Green at Cars Yeah. American Collectors Insurance, classic car insurance designed by collectors for collectors, automotive enthusiasts just like you and me. That's American Collectors Insurance. So, Ross, we are back. So you're going to have to kind of walk me through as a newbie here, because this world of what you created is something that I'm not very familiar with, and I would assume there's probably a few people listening today that maybe don't quite understand it. But before we get into Grid Rival, I want to talk a little bit about your career up to this point, because you're still a pretty young guy, but you've created companies, you've got teams, you guys are doing some very innovative things online. So kind of walk me through this career path you've had, and then we'll dive into Grid Rival.
Yeah, thanks. So kind of have always been a bit of an entrepreneur. When I was 20, I was in, if I wasn't doing something on my own, I was selling things. I sold cars. Did in-home sales, like home improvement sales for a while in my very early 20s. And then my first kind of career job was in the mortgage industry. I did that for 5 years from about 2007 on.
Oh, tough time to be selling mortgages. Oh my gosh.
Very difficult time.
Yeah.
Very difficult time. I learned a lot about, just myself and managing myself, and happened to, towards the very end of that, really started to get into the advertising and marketing side of it, and, driving my own leads through using the internet. Those were kind of the early-ish days of, when Google AdWords was starting to explode. Facebook had just started, allowing advertisers at scale. And so I really started to get excited about that piece. And that was kind of coincided with a waning interest for the space. And so I took the expertise and went out and started a digital advertising agency, and just started offering kind of consulting, which is how most agencies and service-based businesses start to begin with, is kind of one person's expertise, and then they get busy and they have to scale. And that's really ultimately what happened. And then so 7 years later, that was, as you had stated, kind of a multi-million-dollar agency. We had about 25 employees. We were managing $30 to $40 million a year on advertising spend on Facebook, Instagram, Google, Bing, Yahoo, all the major search engines. And we'll get into Grid Rival in a moment, but Grid Rival actually started as a side project when I was running SearchLogic. So kind of in one way, shape, or form, I've always really been kind of focused on doing my own thing, either, building companies or books of business in the case of the mortgage industry on my own.
Well, anybody who survived the mortgage industry starting in 2007 and lasting for 5 years. Oh my gosh, talk about trial by fire. That's like throwing you in a pit of alligators that's on fire and saying, good luck, dude, because that was a very, very challenging time. So my hat's off to you for even sticking with it at that point. I
appreciate that.
Yeah, that was tough. But one of the weird things for me, I grew up in the advertising world, worked in creative, was a creative director, and became an ad executive, if you will, right out of college. Cool. Asking my boss, how can I make more money than sitting here and designing stuff? He said, well, go out and bring some business in. And learned how to do that. But of course, this was way back before the internet. And then helping build a business that was all about marketing and selling products. Boy, about 10 years ago or so, maybe a little even before that, things started to change and this online stuff came along and everybody was trying to figure it all out. So it sounds like you're the kind of guy that takes a step back, looks at everything, goes, okay, let's try this, and see how it works. And the world has changed a lot. So you've kind of been in this really dynamic time period as a young person. And I'll keep calling you young because that's just because you're younger than me. Most people are. But it's a very interesting time. And for me, becoming a podcaster and learning about this digital world, I learned something every day. So I'm very excited to learn about Grid Rival and what you're doing there. So kind of walk us through the concept of what this is, why people do it, how people get involved, what it's all about.
Yeah, so Grid Rival started as a fantasy sports platform for Formula One. And so for you or for any listener that doesn't know or familiar with what fantasy sports is, very popular in football and most traditional sports. March Madness is kind of another example of fantasy sports. But essentially, fantasy sports are where you're picking a lineup of real athletes and you earn points based off of their performance in real world scenarios, right? And there's this element of camaraderie and competition. You're playing with friends, you're in leagues, you're engaged through the whole season. People that follow the NFL have been doing fantasy sports for literally before I was born, since the 60s and 70s, before the internet existed. And so it's become, in NFL, it's so deeply ingrained with the sport that there's, when you watch broadcast television and you're watching NFL, they're talking about fantasy statistics. There's that much depth. And so as a motorsports fan, one of the things that I find fairly common amongst motorsports fans is that a lot of them are usually not traditional sports fans, or their interest in traditional sports is limited. And so that's kind of how I was growing up. And I always saw my friends participating in fantasy sports for football or basketball or whatever it might be, and kind of was just like always jealous of the engagement that it created. And so the tipping point for me was the same year at F1 when I started to like Taylor Swift in 2016. We had stayed in an RV that year out there at Circuit of the Americas. And Thursday before the race, I was inside our RV. And I could hear my friend who was outside the RV and he was yelling. And so I went outside and I said, dude, what's going on? And it turned out he's watching a football game and he has his phone in his hand. He's yelling at his phone because his fantasy lineup was losing.
Oh, and my gosh. I was hoping you'd say Taylor Swift was knocking on your door, but I guess not.
And so that was kind of the tipping point where I just really started to say, why does nothing like this exist for some of the sports that I love? Mm-hmm. And so that's really how it started. It really started just to kind of scratch my own itch, if you will. Had very little business ambition for it early on, but essentially what we did is we built the first iteration of what is now Grid Rival, a season-long fantasy game for Formula One at the time, where you pick 5 drivers and a constructor and you kind of manage them throughout the season. We have this salary kind of cap model where you're always having to watch their pricing move up and down. There's tons of depth to it. And we launched in 2017 and we signed up about 22,000 people the first week that I was online.
What? 22,000 in the first week? Wow.
And so for obvious reasons, I kind of looked at that and I said, maybe this is bigger than I thought it was. This is before Liberty Media had taken over Formula One and started to focus on its digitalization. And for the next year and a half, really couldn't do much with it. I was running another company. I was not in a position to leave and just go try something else because it was shinier. But I got that opportunity 18 months later in late 2018 to exit the company in a way that was, successful and checked some boxes for me. And that exit happened to coincide with a very important moment in the industry I'm in now in the United States, which was the repeal of something called the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act, PASPA, in May of 2018. And the repeal of PASPA is what has allowed sports betting to be kind of decriminalized at a state-by-state level, and has allowed states to now allow sports betting to take place legally and in most places increasingly so online. And so as those two things happened, me leaving the business, PASPA being repealed, I really looked at the space again. I kind of took a step back and I said, what is the opportunity with this audience in this market? And when you look at some of the major operators that are still successful in the space, FanDuel, DraftKings, BetMGM, Caesars Entertainment, some of these really big brands, because that law was repealed and the way it was repealed, I like to compare it to like when prohibition was repealed, right? All of a sudden you have an industry that was heavily regulated, and I don't want to say it became deregulated, but it became decriminalized. And overnight, the total addressable market of that space grew by maybe 2 magnitudes of order. And so the same thing happened in the US. And as a result of there being such a huge vacuum so fast, those major operators were really, even 4 years later, are still focused on just getting to market and really going after the traditional sports betting audience, who are people who are already betting on sports before it was, maybe on black market products, before it was decriminalized. And so I think there's been such a focus on that there really hasn't been a ton of effort put into engaging more niche audiences or more enthusiast audiences, even in traditional sports. And so we just looked at the market and we said, is the motorsports fan base, if we can make some assumptions, and the big assumptions are that we can engage them in sports betting and fantasy, real money gaming to the depth that traditional sports have engaged those fans. If that's something that we can do, is the market big enough to warrant venture style investment, number one, and venture style returns, number two? We started to do a bunch of market research, and we looked at, the sports betting market here in the United States, which is one of the biggest opportunities globally right now. But we also looked at other markets like United Kingdom, where sports betting has been legalized for a very long time, and motorsports is also very, very a dense population of race fans over there. And so all these things kind of added up. And then it happened to check one really cool box that I did not expect for the next business I wanted to build, which was, it happened to be aligned around one of my biggest passions in life, which is cars and motorsports. And so me and my wife had this moment where I just said, if I don't try this thing, I know it's high risk, right? As any tech startup is. Statistically speaking, there's a small percentage of success. And so we kind of sat down. I said, I think if I don't at least try this, I'm going to regret it for as long as I live.
Sure.
And so I went full time in 2019. My first investor was actually a previous guest of yours, Rob Ferrial, who runs Team Hardpoint in the IMSA WeatherTech program.
Oh, great.
And have been working towards it since then. And we're literally probably a week or two. The game has been a free play game up to this point, and we are probably within a week or two of launching our first actual paid wagering product in the United States.
Wow. Well, how exciting is this? I tell you, your timing probably couldn't have been much better. And one of the reasons I say that is the series Drive to Survive, which I think has blown up Formula One exposure here in the United States specifically. And I can give you my own example. I've always loved Formula One and followed it. Trying to get my kids to, not that interested, especially my daughter, Jan. No, sorry, Dad. Why is this on? I don't want to watch it. Put the Kardashians on. And well, since Drive to Survive, she is an F1 freak. And I tell you, this past weekend, we all got together, the family, and she's got a little boy now, and her husband, who's a huge sporting maniac, just loves it, and my son and his wife. And we were driving through a wild animal park, and she was seeing, going, Dad, look who won the race this morning. And she's talking about all the drivers, and I'm going, who are you? What?
Yeah.
And so
I know, it's incredible.
It's incredible. So to get people engaged and excited about the individual drivers, which is a lot of what your whole program is about, is pretty cool. So everything seems to be lining up very nicely. So my hat's off to you and your team, what you're doing. I want to walk through a little bit of how this helps people when they work, because this is an app that you download onto your computer or your phone, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And there's some things on your website here that you have, and I'm going to walk you through them and have you explain a little bit about each of them and why they're important for somebody, because my hope is that somebody out there who finds this interesting, or maybe had the office pool, doing the fantasy football team, but they yawn at football. It's not their thing, or baseball, whatever, but they love cars, going, Now's my chance to have some fun. So one of the things you have are research tools. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so one of the goals with the game was to create something that had a high level of engagement. And we also knew that, people, not only people that play fantasy sports, but I think even motorsports fans, a lot of times are very technical people. And I think that's more so true for the kind of real OG, diehard F1 fans. And so we knew that we wanted to give them, above and beyond the core mechanics of the game of kind of picking and managing these drivers of the season, we wanted to give them a lot of things that they could engage with, a lot of different touch points. And so we worked really hard at coming up with data points and tables and charts and graphs and all the things that you're probably seeing on the website, if that's what you're looking at, where they can go, compare drivers side by side. They can look at their historical fantasy data and their fantasy salaries. And, there's hundreds of different data points. If you're talking about all the unique ways you can slice them and compare them, to be able to, for those who are into it at this depth, really do the research you need to build the best lineup.
Yeah, it's take F1. There's so many pieces to the puzzle here. And another one you have is League and Global Leaderboards. Tell us about those.
Yep. So the way the game is structured right now is, if anyone's ever done fantasy, you're typically placed in a league. So the whole game right now, the free version, is based off of the concept of playing with a group of friends. And leagues, we see the average is probably on GridRival is probably 8 or 9 people, but there's some that have, I think there's one league that's like 6,500.
What? 6,500? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's a group called Formula Latina out of Mexico, and
wow, they
promote it a lot. So anyways, they have a lot of players in there. But every week, or every race, I should say, you're competing to earn points based off of how your team does. And then those points accumulate throughout the season. And so you're ranked on a leaderboard amongst everybody else in your team. And then we also do like a global leaderboard, which ranks basically you against every player on the application. I think of this year, there's 74,000 or something people that built fantasy F1 teams. So you actually see how you stack up against every person on the product globally. For those that are wondering, I'm currently ranked like 4,300th, and
okay.
I built the game, so it's
pick up your game,
it's
dude.
Challenging.
yeah, no kidding. Well, that's what makes it fun, and that's what all sports is about, is competition. So I think it's cool. Now you have another category called Simple Team Management.
Yep. So I think that just kind of refers to the game itself. We try and make it. As your first question alluded, with the charts and the graphs and the research tools, I think the flip side of that is we try and make it easy for the enthusiasts who maybe don't necessarily want to get in at that level. And so the core of the game is, like I said, you pick 5 drivers, you manage them on contracts of anywhere from 1 to 5 races. So throughout the season, you're kind of thinking about like how long should you sign somebody for? And you make that decision based off of another element of our game, which is every driver has a salary associated with them. And the salary fluctuates depending on how they perform. And so a really big part of the mechanics of the game are trying to find drivers that are underpriced. Because what happens is, let's give an example of, well, let's just say we're talking about Formula One. Let's say you sign Pierre Gasly on a 3-race contract, and his salary on GridRival at the time you sign him is $14 million. Well, if he has 3 really good races, and by the time you release him, it's 16, that $2 million kind of arbitrage gets added back to your team. And so every player on GridRival starts the season with $100 million in fantasy budget. And you'll see there's actually some people in the global leaderboard right now that have 150. So over the course of the season, they've done their kind of research to see like who's underpriced and timed it right. And so I'm not making a case for the simplicity of it, which is what you asked me about. But,
yeah.
those are elements that that aren't required to have a good time. But I think like the core of the game is picking and managing those teams on those contracts.
Yeah. Wow. A lot of moving pieces here. Now, also to make it maybe not as simple, detailed performance data. Oh my gosh, we start getting into this world. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, I think that's probably kind of goes back to the first point. We track a lot of different data points, have all sorts of different ways to display them to give the user, as much information as they can to make smart choices, which I think is going to be as true as that is for our free play game. I think it's going to be exponentially more true once people are playing with money on the line, right? They're going to want to make sure that the teams and the lineups they're putting together are competitive.
And lastly, engaging social features. This is all about social.
Yep.
Doing stuff with friends and people around the world.
Yep. So our stated mission as a business is provide the world's race fans deeper engagement and community with the sports they love. And so, community and content has always been something that we're chasing. And we think about it in every feature that we build. How can this thing be social? And so a small example of that, and maybe the most prominent right now, is in every league, we have really nice built-in chat functionality. I mean, I'd put it on par with a product like Discord or something, where actually in your league yourself, you can swipe up and there's a chat feed. So like one of the things we found is that a lot of people that are in leagues together don't necessarily talk a ton about motorsports like outside of this context. And so it gives them a medium to, as the race is on, to open and talk with their friends about what's happening and talk about the drama. And so it's a way for them to connect. We also have a Discord community that's new and growing where people can get on and share lineups and talk about strategy and stuff like that. So we're going to continue to focus heavily on how is the game not only exciting, but also how does it work to connect the racing community together.
How fun. Very cool. We'll take a short break or pitch stop, I guess. Pitch stop is what I should say. And we'll be back on the track in just a moment. So sit tight. You've heard me talk about Linkage Magazine here on Cars Yeah for a couple of years now. Well, they're growing. And in 2023, they're going to grow from 4 issues a year to 6. And there's an opportunity here for you to take advantage of this growth. If you go to linkagemag.com and click on the renew button, if you already subscribe, you can get a great deal. Use the code RENEW6 for 1 year and you'll get 6 issues for the price of 4, or type in RENEW12 for 2 years, where you also have a great savings. Plus, they'll even throw in a free Linkage hat. How cool is that? The publisher of Linkage is Donald Osborne. He's been a guest multiple times here on Cars Yeah. He's become a good friend of mine, and I'll tell you, Linkage Magazine is one of those newer magazines that you're going to want to get. It's all about experiences, opinions, and values. It's a wonderful publication, something I look forward to getting. And now that I'm going to be getting 6 a year, even more special. So go to linkagemag.com. Again, use the code RENEW6 or RENEW12 to get that special deal. Do it before December 31st, 2022, so that in 2023, you'll get 6 issues of Linkage Magazine instead of 4. If your car started today, well, thank a tech. If that truck delivering your goods today got to your home or your business, thank a tech. If that airplane you rode in took off and landed safely, and if that boat you're riding in arrived at the dock safe and sound, that's right, thank a tech. One thing the pandemic has taught us is that great techs keep America rolling. They are essential workers and we need them. Support career and technical education by getting involved with TechForce Foundation. It's a Cars Yeah charity of choice. Learn more at techforce.org today. So, challenges. Now, anytime you're starting a new business fraught with challenges, was there any one thing, there's probably a lot of things, but any one thing that stands out as you built this whole concept, or was there a big challenge, or is there continues to be a big challenge that you're still facing with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. Like, startup is a constant challenge. You're always playing this game of like, you need to survive the next 9 months and then go raise money, and
Yeah.
It's always difficult. But there has definitely been 1 or 2 very, very challenging moments. And I think the biggest that comes to mind has been, up until 2 weeks from now, when this first daily fantasy product goes live, where, you'll be able to compete with real money on a week by week basis. Up until now, everything has been like we talked about, the season long league model. And the challenge with that is, we can use football as an example, right? With season long fantasy football leagues, 90% of all people sign up before the season starts, right? It makes sense. It's a season long thing. You don't play for half a season, you play for the full season. So that's how that's very true for us. And that has made it in the past very difficult to launch, because you're talking about having to spend almost all of your entire marketing budget in this very small 6-week window. So what happened was in 2020, we had spent about a year building the first version of the product that we were going to put in the app stores. And I think we all know what happened in 2020. We were, at that point, we were just focused on, it was only Formula One. We currently have MotoGP, and we're talking about adding NASCAR and some other sports to the product for next season. But at that time, it was a single sport. And I'll never forget, we were ready to launch, and it was Friday before the race, and the Australian GP, everyone was there. It was set up. They were ready to start practice.
Yeah.
Cancel the race.
Yeah. Now, I got to say, you are a stoic guy, because to deal with your first career during probably one of the biggest financial meltdowns, and then to start another, you just look in the mirror and go, what am I doing wrong? I'm trying to be a good person here.
Yeah. Well, perhaps it was, it was preparation. I think, you go through enough of this and you realize that, like, if you listen to podcasts like Startup, right, and they're interviewing these people who have these really successful companies, there's always these stories. There's always these near-death experiences. I think it's just part of it. And so it doesn't make it easier, but I think it helps you at least understand that like you're not alone. And but anyway, so yeah, Formula One canceled the season. And there was no indication of when it was coming back, if it was going to come back. And then when it did come back, if I remember correctly, they only announced 5 races. And so as a season-long game, you kind of got to think yourself as a player, like what's really the point at that point, And so that was obviously a challenging situation in and of itself. But when you're a pre-revenue company that's burning cash every month, it's exponentially more challenging because you don't get a redo, right? You have to go raise more money. Yeah. So we had to go raise more money, and we were fortunate to have had enough success and enough excitement around the product, enough excitement about the growth of the sport to make that possible. And we relaunched it in 2021. We passed 200,000 users, and everything worked out. There was moments, there's months where, you're kind of wondering, like, are we going to make it through? I think a lot of people had that mindset back in that period of time.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Way too many for sure. Well, If you look ahead on your bucket list concept, and I don't want to look too far ahead because we don't want to jinx anything here. I'm sincere that you stuck with it. My hat's off to you. I mean, that's a tough deal. It's easy to give up. If you look at your bucket list, maybe the next year to two out, where do you see your business?
Yeah, I think bucket list for me would be kind of getting past like Series B stage, which is a really large inflection point for a lot of technology startups. There's a lot of drop off at that stage. It's a growth stage, so I think it's an indicator that the business would be having a very successful product market fit. And then I think ultimately the dream for me would be just to keep growing. And I think the business growing will help me grow and develop personally. I think that's one of the reasons why I started in the first place was, I wanted a new and different challenge. And so, what the business is going to require from me 24 months from now is very different than what it's going to require from me now, and probably very different than anything I've ever experienced in the past. And so I think the opportunity and ability to get to that stage is a big thing for me, and something that I hope to be able to say that I accomplished.
Well, bravo again. Now let's add another complexity to this, the ability to use Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. Is that going to be an option?
It might be. I think we'll have to assess that based off of, how much influence we think it's going to have on ease of use. I think cryptocurrency is not quite there yet. If you look at people's relationship with it, it's more investment still than it is transaction. And so for us, I don't think it's certainly not the low-hanging fruit that we have in front of us at our transaction volumes. Maybe someday we could, but I think my gut instinct too is this is for obvious reasons a heavily regulated space, and so you're essentially throwing on another heavily regulated space on top of it. So
right.
The answer is probably at some point, but I'd be surprised. If you can deposit money on GridRival and Bitcoin anytime in the next, 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, it's an odd world right now, the economic world for sure. So let's talk about something fun. Now, you mentioned at the very beginning of this, you're an F1 fan, you're a car guy, and we're on cars, yeah. So is there a special vehicle story in your life you could share?
I don't know about story, but there's definitely a special vehicle, which was my first car that I ever bought was a 1987 325 IS, an E30 BMW. I was always really into BMWs, and put a lot of work into that. And, really I had it dialed in, and I drove that car for, I think 3 or 4 years. It had a rough ending, our relationship.
Uh-oh. There's where the story comes in.
Yeah,
right?
I know, right?
Now that you've teased us.
I'm not building a good case for you hopping in my car.
No.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably the first car where I really was excited about it, and I had a lot of time to spend on it, and it just was kind of connected to it. I don't have any good stories, but I think I have a lot of memories from that vehicle.
E30s, there's a whole group of followers these days that follow those cars. There's a whole group up here in the Northwest that races them. which is pretty cool. I worked with a guy for years named Tim that had one that had, I think it had 450,000. I mean, huge amount of miles. Now, he was a very good mechanic, and he just kept that thing going and going and going. It was quite amazing. And I may be even way short falling that. If he's listening, sorry, Tim, he'll probably call me right now and go, Mark, it was 795,000 miles. I mean, it was amazing. So great little cars. So I'm going to be your car psychologist here a little bit, Ross. I'm going to crawl into your skull here. If you were reincarnated, manifest as a vehicle, what would you be and why?
I saw this. I think I would be a funny car.
Like a dragster funny car?
Yeah.
Okay. Why is that?
And I came to this conclusion because my personality is very much kind of oftentimes ready, fire, aim. I'm really quick out the gate. I attack things quickly, and that's my skill. Is like if I'm focus me on one or two key things, I move really quickly and get them done. At the same time, I'm kind of like a little bit of a goofball, and sarcasm is my second language.
Okay.
So I kind of feel like those two things paired together would really fit. Because funny cars are funny looking.
Yeah, they're great. Built a lot of funny car models when I was a kid. I love those things. So and I did have a guy named Prudhomme on my show here last year. No, it was actually this year, I believe, who raced some of the Hot Wheels funny cars, sponsored by them back in the day. And I thought, man, I'm getting to talk to Don Prudhomme. I used to build models that this guy raced in when I was a little kid. This guy's a legend.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Very cool. So how about great reading? We love books here. This could be books on any subject. Is there a book you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I was going to say one of my favorite books is, speaking of Stoicism, which you brought up, is a book called Ego's the Enemy by one of my favorite authors, Ryan Holiday, who's kind of a modern Stoic philosopher. He really studies a lot of Aristotle and Marcus Aurelius and all these guys. And it was a book that kind of opened my eyes and, exposed me to a line of thinking around how we assess ourselves, that was needed at the time in my life when I read it, which is about, I don't know, at this point, 3 or 4 years ago. I've loved everything that he's put out, but that was a really, and I have a long list of book recommendations, but that's usually high up on them. I think it's just a really good dive into ego and how it affects people and how it can negatively affect people's decision pathways.
Oh gosh, yeah, it can destroy people. Yeah, I love that. There's some great websites and podcasts out there about Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism. I love that.
Oh, I'm sure.
The whole concept of the whole thing is a good check on one's ego, as they say.
Yep.
So I love it.
Absolutely.
So today I'm going to be the great benefactor. Although I'm not going to fund your business, I'm going to fund your fun. I'm going to enable you to go on the ultimate drive. So I'm going to park anything you'd like in the garage or the driveway. You can take anybody with you, even somebody from the past who's no longer with us, which opens the door wide, and you can go anywhere you'd like. So what does this ultimate drive look like for you, Ross?
So let's start with the car.
Okay.
The car is a Ferrari F50.
Nice.
One of my favorite vehicles growing up. I think if somebody said, any budget, what car do you want? That would be the one thing
nice
I'd put in the garage.
Nice choice.
So the who was difficult, and I had to narrow this down. I didn't have a lot of time, and I think if this was a real thing, I'd have all sorts of spreadsheets to figure this out. Important decision.
You don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. We'll just say just for today.
So I narrowed. I gave myself some parameters, which were living, right? Because I had narrowed it down, and then kind of related to the thing we're talking about today, cars, motorsports. So I put Toto Wolff.
Okay, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. He is super impressive to me. When I watch Drive to Survive, I think he's a genius. I would love to I think the question would, who'd be driving? And I think I'd let him drive. But I'd love to just kind of hear his life story from his point of view and how he got to where he is and his views on motivation and management and leadership. I just think from an outward perspective, he's got a level head and he's a genius.
Yeah. Torger Christian Toto Wolff, Austrian billionaire motorsports executive. That show it gave me a whole different perspective on that guy that I never had. And I think it did that for a lot of the people other than the drivers. that really opened up F1 and the intriguing, interesting people. We've all heard about these team owners that are flamboyant, crazy, and wild and do crazy stuff. And yeah, but he's interesting. Yeah, what fun. That's a nice choice. I don't think anyone's picked him either. I think that's pretty cool. And an F50, you're not going to hear anything he says, but
yeah.
I got to drive one of those F50s once, and it was very interesting because everyone said, okay, this is basically an F1 car with a body on it. You can kind of toot around in that thing and have some fun, but when you put your foot into it, it turns into a monster. Just a monster.
I bet. Well, I'm very jealous. Insane. Hopefully I'll get the chance someday.
Yeah. Well, I think you just might. So you've taken us on a wonderful ride today, Ross. I knew this would be a very interesting show and a different kind of show. And I love what you're doing, not only for the world of fun for people, but opening up a whole new door for people that maybe like me wouldn't get involved in fantasy leagues, but will with this one. So thank you for doing that. Before I let you go, could you share maybe some words of inspiration, a success quote or a mantra?
Yeah, I'll tell you one of the things that I tell my daughters every night that I've learned, which is, and it's going to sound counterintuitive, talking about motorsports. It doesn't apply to that situation.
Okay.
But I would say you have to slow down to go fast. And my personality, like we talked about earlier, is a funny car. One of the things I've had to learn over time is sometimes you just got to be patient. You got to let things happen. And when you try and rush, you do it wrong. You have to redo it. It takes longer. And so that's been a big lesson for me. I don't know that it will apply to everybody, but it's been something that had I learned, in my early 20s, I think things may have ended up differently. But it's been something that I've been intent on trying to not pass down and continue to work on it myself.
Nice fathering there you're doing for your daughters. I think that's cool. And when I went to racing school, I remember a day specifically where I was starting to feel like, okay, I can go a little quicker here. And I remember the guy in my ear saying, you need to slow down.
Yeah.
and I'm like, what? No, this is all about going fast. No, you need to slow down. Here's why, and explained it. And okay, kind of makes sense before you go fast. So yeah, great advice there. How can people learn more about, download, and get involved with Grid Rival?
Yeah, so you can find us in the App Store on Android or Apple. Just type in Grid Rival, one word. And you can also check us out on gridrival.com or any of the main social media channels, Twitter, Instagram. And you can reach me if you'd like to, Ross at gridrival.com, if you have the Ferrari F50 that you'd like me to have a ride in.
I know a few guys up here might be able to do that for you, so I'll give them some calls. One thing we didn't mention, we've been talking about F1, but you're also into MotoGP?
I'm increasingly so. I'd say I'm kind of like, traditional sports fans are very similar. Like you talk to a lot of NFL fans, right? They like basketball, but they maybe are still the most hardcore about NFL. I'm very similar. I'm probably the most, my knowledge base is mostly most deep around Formula One, but I kind of love all motorsports. I'm getting more and more into MotoGP as we've added it to the product. I'm also, for the first time, getting a lot more into NASCAR.
Yeah.
Which is something historically that I just has not hooked me, but recently has really started to intrigue me a lot more, and will actually be the next sport on our platform. But yeah, I am. I'm an IndyCar. I've always been super into IndyCar. Went all the IndyCar races growing up here at PIR in Portland. So
yeah. Well, yep. I hope that the Drive to Survive documentary series producers get into those other platforms, because I think they'll blow those up too.
Yeah, I agree.
And you think about NASCAR, talk about characters. Oh my God.
Well, there's rumors that that's already taking place. I don't know if it's Netflix that's doing it, but yeah, I know there's some talks about a NASCAR type show, and one with maybe IMSA as well, which I think IMSA would actually be really fascinating, because you have the mix of pros and amateurs and different classes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I hope they do. I think it'll be great. Hey, I want to do a shout out. Thank you to our mutual friend, Andy Santiago at Legendary Podcast, for introducing me to Ross. Andy, thank you for setting this all up. Ross, hey, congratulations. Thanks for being so generous today with your time and your expertise and sharing Grid Rival with us. Sounds like a wonderful, fun platform for the Cars Yeah listeners to learn more about and get involved. Until you and I talk again, I'll see you down the road.
All right. Thanks so much, Mark. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome. This was fun.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's ride here at Cars Yeah. Drive on over to carsyeah.com to find show notes and inspiring automotive fun. Download your free copy of Filler Up, a fun book filled with gorgeous photographs of fuel filler fun, including quotes from more inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Download your copy today, and we'll see you next time on Cars Yeah!